Well, good morning, everybody. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to day 3 of the UCP Conference on Latinos with Disabilities. My name is Andrea Stoesz. I'm the chair of the UCP Policy Committee and Director of External Affairs at Gillette Children's, which is the only children's hospital in the country to be a UCP affiliate. I'm so honored to be speaking with you all today about the important issues that impact Latinos with disabilities, two fast-growing groups in the United States. Despite this, Latinos with disabilities are often left out of policy discussions. And when developing policy, it is so important that all groups are considered. Without doing so, public policy can have serious and unintended consequences. The Policy Committee is tasked with identifying policy priorities for the UCP National Office, and we take our role very seriously. We understand the importance of assuring policy is equitable and inclusive. And I want to briefly highlight a few areas we focused on. First, we focused on increasing funding for home and community-based services. Everyone deserves to have the choice to live where they believe is best for them. Many people with disabilities utilize these services to continue to live independently. And I know I don't have to tell this audience, but these services are woefully underfunded. Second, we want to increase funding for cerebral palsy research. Did you know that despite being the most common disability diagnosed in childhood, there is no dedicated federal funding for CP research? Moreover, there is limited tracking at the CDC of individuals with cerebral palsy, which means we have a limited understanding of this population's size, demographics, and needs. We must understand this if we are going to advocate for increased federal support for this group. Finally, we're advocating for the elimination of Medicaid asset limits. These limits often force individuals with a disability to choose between comprehensive health coverage or economic health, and contributes to keeping individuals with disabilities in poverty. These are just a few things the Policy Committee is working on, and as we look to 2025, we'll continue to advocate for these as well as other policies that support the people that the UCP network serves. Before I close, I want to thank this year's sponsors, Waymo, Source America, and Anchor, our conference speakers and presenters, and especially you, our audience, for supporting not only this event, but our mission to help people with disabilities as they strive to live life without limits. Now, let me introduce the coordinator of this conference, James Garcia, who will also be serving as the moderator for today's panel discussions. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great last day of your conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks, of course, for all the work that you, as our chair of our policy committee, sincerely appreciate it. And your background brings great assets to that position. So thank you so much for that. I'm James Garcia. I'm the conference coordinator, and I'm also communications coordinator for United Cerebral Palsy, which is headquartered in the Washington, D.C. region. We are an organization that's been around for 75 years now. So we're marking that anniversary this year. So thank you for being part of this event. This event was created 3 years ago, or at least this is our third event. And the goal is, is really straightforward. What we're trying to do is speak to the fact that the country has, become diversified, of course, in recent decades, increasingly diversified. And one of the realities is these days is that nearly 1 in 5 people in the United States are of Latino origin. It is now the largest ethnic group in the country, minority group, if you will, in the country. And of course, that has all sorts of dynamics with regards to our economy, our education system, our public health system, and of course, the community of people with disabilities. A big focus on this has been about kind of raising issues that perhaps would commonly be dealt with in other conferences, transitions to higher education, for instance, which is going to be our first panel for today, and other subjects, but bringing it to you from a perspective of the Latino community, so that you have an understanding of the role and impact of that community on the discussion and how they are affected. With that as just sort of a quick snapshot of the objectives of this event, I want to sort of briefly go a quick roundtable, and I'll mention who our panelists are going to be for today, but then process-wise, what we're going to do is we're going to open with Dr. Javier Robles from Rutgers University, giving us kind of an overview for our discussions, seed, if you will, to launch our conversation, and then we'll go from that to a roundtable discussion with our experts. So first, I will mention Dr. Javier Robles. He's at Rutgers University, a longtime activist and expert, not just on disability rights issues, but also within the Latino community, and a tremendous asset to this event. He's been participating, I believe, each year since we've started the event. So it's fantastic to have him back. Dave Berthiaume is at the Source America. And Dave brings a long background in addition to his work with Source America, and I'll have him describe what that organization does. But in addition to that, he brings a long background in terms of public education in the federal government, Department of Education. In addition, William Loyd, who is at the University of Iowa, addresses through his organization disability issues at that campus and has been doing that for some time and has a long background in this world as well. And then just joining us, fortunately, because she was in transit, is Rene Lambert, who is a student, a college student, who's going to give us that lived experience perspective on the topic that we're going to be addressing today. And that topic, just a one-liner, is the challenges and benefits and advantages and rewards of transitioning into college once you're out of high school. As most of you in the audience probably know, public schools, often by a federal mandate, provide a whole array of services that basically end at about the time that our young people become adults and are anxious to go out into university life, or I should say, at least post-high school life, because it could be all sorts of higher education. And so the supports are not necessarily there. It's a little hit and miss, depending on the university you're at. Some do a much better job than others. Some states do a better job than others. And that's what our discussion is going to be focusing on today. So I hope you'll all get something out of that as well. And so now I'm going to just pass it along to Dr. Robles.
Gracias, James, and welcome everybody to today's conference. Thank you, Andrea, as well. So let me begin by just telling you just a little bit about myself before I get going. I'm a professor at the kinesiology in the health department at the university, but I work, through United Spinal as a board member, but also work in New Jersey on disability issues and Latino issues, like James said. So I have somewhat of a good deal of experience in this, just as a student with a disability initially, going from high school to college, and now as someone who teaches, and in some cases teaches students with disabilities at the university, but also works with the Office of Disability Services in making sure students receive the accommodations that they need. I guess the first thing I want to say is that for our community in particular, Latinos and community Latinas, it's not super easy always to get into the schools we want. I know it was mentioned earlier in terms of benefits. Not every state has the same benefits for students. While New Jersey may have things like personal care assistance for students who are going into a college setting, another state may not. And other states may have something that New Jersey doesn't. So I'm just going to go through a list of stuff I prepared based on some of these things. So I would say that the first things for students seeking to go to college, whether it's community college or a four-year college, is really to begin early. You don't want to wait till your senior year to start planning. Your parents don't want to wait till your senior year to assist you with planning. So begin the process early, as early as possible. Ideally your sophomore year would be good. Work with your high school counselor to get yourself prepared for this. Super important when you're doing this, and I think James mentioned this, a lot of students who come to college have been covered by certain laws like the IDEA. Some of them have had an IEP or an individualized education plan, which have assisted them and their parents in basically going through the educational system before college. Once you leave high school, you no longer have those. So, be aware of your rights. The Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504, which is used a lot in terms of accommodations at colleges, and understand those. And there's a lot of resources available online. I work with a few people who've been researching which colleges. So research colleges, often depending on what you're looking for, right? If you want to go to a good medical college, then see what the best medical colleges are. If you want to go to like a visual arts college or something else, research those colleges. But some things to remember in researching colleges, if you're a person with a disability, depending on your disability, if you have a college that's out of state, are you going to receive the same services out of state that you would have received in state, right? As an example, I mentioned that New Jersey has a personal care assistant program for students going to college. So if I left New Jersey, the state that I might be going to might not have that. So even though I got the college that I wanted, I probably wouldn't do well if I don't have services, right? So super important to make sure that you research what services are going to be available if you move to another state. And will you qualify for those services if you're not a citizen of that state? So once you identify the college, again, make a list of these colleges and see how accessible they are. These colleges going to be accessible to you. And that doesn't just mean physical accessibility. That means, if I'm a person who is neurodivergent or I'm on the spectrum, does this college have places where I can chill out for a while? Are the professors, they're going to, be more accommodating at this college than other colleges, right? So depending on your disability, you want to make sure that you research the colleges that you're going to. Make sure, really important in terms of documentation, that before you even go to a college, that you have all your documentation lined up. So then when you get into a college, you can go to the Office of Disability Services in that college and basically get set up to have the accommodations that you need. Gone through my list, sorry. Another important thing, thinking about arrangement. So if you're going to stay on campus housing, a lot of students with disabilities stay on campus here in Rutgers. Our college is huge. I think we have about 50,000 students. So it's a big college, but we also have housing that's accessible, that's modern, and we make sure that the students, have access to that. Some older colleges may not have that kind of housing, so make sure that, you check in with them in advance. Before graduating, preferably, you should reach out to your state's vocational rehabilitation service. Each state has a vocational rehabilitation service program for students with disabilities. And once you apply and are accepted, you should receive career counseling and guidance. They should help you identify goals. And once you get accepted into a college, they should also assist with funding of tuition, books, and other fees to make sure that you can stay in college. They can buy assistive technology if you need it. They can pay to make vehicles accessible. Let's say you commute. Not everyone's going to stay in college. So those are some of the things that I would recommend. We're probably going to get into some more. So I think that's good. Is that good, James? Or you want me to?
I think that's a good laying of the land. I mean, I think the takeaway is as much advanced research as possible. And of course, we advise all of our young people, my children as well, that you need to know where you're going, what they offer, whether it's a good fit for you. And so that applies to able-bodied children, able-bodied young people, but perhaps doubly so because we know the inconsistencies across the country. So So I think it's important. So thank you for that. Yes, I'm going to go now to Bill, to William Loyd Jr., who's going to talk about his work at the university. And feel free, Bill, to just sort of feed on any of the issues that Dr. Robles raised.
Well, James, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to participate in today's panel. My name is Bill Loyd, and I'm the director for the University of Iowa REACH program. That program is primarily for students who have intellectual and other learning disabilities. Students may also have physical disabilities, and some of our students may even be dually diagnosed with some mental health kinds of issues. So we see our role as helping the University of Iowa become an inclusive community. It has not been long since people with intellectual and other learning disabilities have been welcomed on college campuses, right? So their intellectual abilities may have ruled them out. But thankfully, because of the advent of laws like the Higher Education Opportunities Act, programs like this have been established across the country. There are some 320 plus programs across the country now, where students with intellectual and other learning disabilities can come and have the full college experience. Our program allows students to stay from 2 to 4 years. And while they are with us, they do career exploration. What kinds of job do I want to get once I'm done? They live in the college residence halls. They participate in student organizations. They go to the Hawkeye games, right? So everything any other student does, we support our students to do, with that whole notion of integration does not necessarily equal inclusion, right? So just because you're on a college campus doesn't mean that you're a part of the fabric of that college campus. So we really push to try to help our students become integrated and included on the college campus by taking an active part in this college ecosystem that exists here. Would love to just kind of reiterate some of the things that Dr. Robles said about doing your research for programs. For if you have a student or if you are a student who has an intellectual or learning disability, a great resource for looking for programs like ours is thinkcollege.net. It is the national clearance center for programs like ours. And we call ourselves Inclusive Post-Secondary Education Programs. That's for short, we call ourselves IPSEs. And so again, there's a number of them at community colleges, technical colleges, universities, and some are extensions of high schools. UIReach is nested in the College of Education at the University of Iowa. And as such, not only are we giving our students the opportunity to be a part of college or have a college experience, but we're also giving the opportunity to other students at the university who are studying careers related to supporting our students. The practical experience of being a peer mentor. So we employ some 50 plus peer mentors across the campus. They may be studying therapeutic rec or nursing or special education or you name it, a variety of studies. Or they may just be someone who says, I have a family member who has an intellectual or developmental disability, and I want to be a part of what's happening at UIReach. So again, providing that experience not just to our students, but to the larger community, to the university, to the businesses that agree to host our students in internships while they are here, and providing some direct technical assistance to those businesses in ways to accommodate the needs of neurodiverse populations in their workplaces. UIReach is also currently involved in a couple of initiatives. One in Puerto Rico. There's not an IPSE in Puerto Rico right now. So we're trying to work with some folk out of Puerto Rico to establish an IPSE there. We'll be going to Puerto Rico in January to do a presentation about UIReach and how a program like this is, again, a great way to enhance any college, any university that would open its doors and be inclusive to persons with intellectual and other learning disabilities. We've also taken students on an international studies tour to places like Costa Rica, right? So where some of our students who are of Latino heritage got to see how other parts of the world are operating within their education systems, their cultural vibes, their cultural norms. So we believe in supporting students. REACH has a population of roughly 12% of persons of color. We are in Iowa, so there's no surprise that the vast majority of our students are Caucasian, but about 12% of our 75 students happen to be persons of color, and we're really proud of that. And trying to make those cultural fits, not only coming to college, but finding other persons. We've been able to contact a campus fraternity that is for persons who are of Latino descent, and helped one of our students join that fraternity so that he felt culturally at home here on the campus. So it's not enough to just make sure that the classes are right or the dorms right, but helping students feel culturally at home in a place where they happen to be in the minority here. So that's just a little bit about REACH. One of the other exciting things that we're doing as a follow-up to what Dr. Robles was saying is we are working with Voc Rehab to prepare high school students with that plan post high school graduation. As students are leaving the entitlement system that is a part of K-12 and going into an eligibility system, we noticed the cliff effect, right? So we're educating students and their parents on how to plan for a post-high school graduation career. If you want to go to college, that's great. But if you want to go to tech school or if you want to go right into employment, that's great. Let us help you get you the information so that you can build your plan and move that plan forward.
I think, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. A lot of great information in a pretty short period of time, but thank you so much. It really kind of gives us a quick overview. I have a couple like specific questions before I go to Dave. In terms of the demographics at the campus, does your university have a good way of sort of measuring how many students with disabilities, not beyond even just using your service, those who participate directly are on your campus? And then the second question you're welcome to segue into, and you already kind of alluded to this a little bit with regards to working with Voc Rehab. Do you find that the students, when they arrive, have been prepared generally or not for college life, those who are kind of go through your program?
Both are great questions. At the University of Iowa, we do have a student disability services office. And so if a student discloses that they have a disability, that office is there to help with any kind of accommodation that student might need. So that's our way of measuring how many students who have self-disclosed with disabilities are a part of our campus. And we work hand in hand with that office, especially as our students are enrolled in the traditional classes. That student may need extra testing time or may need a reader or might need a note taker or what have you. But the Student Disability Services Office on our campus is a great partner of ours and does a lot of outreach to persons of all disability types on our campus and is there to support those students in that regard. To your question of preparedness for college, I would dare say that the preparedness level of the students that we are seeing is probably on par with the preparedness level of neurotypical students, right?
So that's good and bad. So that's good and bad, right? I mean,
that's right, exactly. But we do have a few things to help with that transition. For example, we sponsor tours on campus and students can come and be a part of the campus tours. For students who are accepted to the program, we sponsor a full week of camp where they can come and get accustomed to the campus before the other 35,000 students land on campus, right? And just kind of learn their way around, learn the transportation systems, learn where the dining halls are, just learning how to navigate campus and getting set up for, colleges and universities are using a high degree of technology now. So a good part of that week is dedicated to making sure that those students are equipped with those apps and those other helpful features that they can utilize to make their transition a lot smoother. So that camp gives us that opportunity to do that. As I said, in the high school arena, we are working that program that I mentioned is a 9-month program. So students come to campus once a month. to do everything from career exploration to learn about options post-graduation. And then in addition to those 9 sessions during the month, we also sponsor a camp for those students to actually come and get the experience of being on campus and explore it to see, is college for me? Is college right for me? I would say that on the parents' part, the readiness piece is just in figuring out how to make it all financially accessible. Far too many barriers still exist there. And we've got a lot of work to do. And so the ADA went a long way in making things physically accessible. But for making it financially accessible, we've got a lot more work to do to make sure that students and families who want to have this as a part of their experience can actually access it.
Okay, that's very helpful. Okay, I'm going to go to Dave, and then we'll come back because there are other questions I'm sure I'll be posing. But let's go to Dave. Berthiaume, there we go. I just got it. Please take it away and talk about your work in the education field and how it kind of ties into what we've heard so far.
Thank you, James. Appreciate that. So it's really striking and interesting for me to hear hear Bill's story and also Dr. Robles' overview, because I approached this or have been involved with this from the federal perspective, and more specifically at the Department of Education, where I worked as an attorney for about 20 years, advising not only higher education, the higher education office there that supports the programs that Bill discussed, the one that he works on at the University of Iowa, as well as working with the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services at the Department of Ed. And that office oversees and does enforcement and work on IDEA, both Part C and Part B. So it's really always, it is interesting to hear how this is working, how the programs work, especially Bill's program on the ground. So, but currently I work at a nonprofit called Source America. Source America is part of a federal program called the Ability One program. And the Ability One program supports individuals with disabilities, in some cases serious disabilities, to find employment working on federal contracts. And so right now we have approximately maybe 36,000 individuals working on federal contracts across the country, working at a variety of federal buildings and on military bases, and doing lots of different work to support federal contracting efforts. But that's Source America. But I just wanted to add that and just kind of emphasize, I think, Javier's point about starting early. I mean, I think that's something that's very consistent and built into IDEA and the IEPs of having the parent and the student thinking about what the student's goals are and where they want to be, whether that's employment, what kind of employment that could be, education, community college, 4-year, all the different options that are out there. It's just imperative to start thinking and starting early. And starting early allows you to perhaps take advantage of unique education programs, start a college level class while you're in high school, build an employment record and background, whether it's an internship or apprenticeship. All of that just follows from thinking about what the next steps and what the goals are. So I did want to mention just briefly and just kind of tying in with the overall just emphasis of this panel with regards to programs like Build, the IPSI program. I do think that there's a role for parents to continue to advocate and to encourage that those programs are established at more and different universities. The numbers that I had were 300, so I was glad to hear it's closer to 325. But what I do recall from my time at the Department of Ed is that those programs are not completely widespread and evenly spread around the country. There's a real shortage of the IPSI programs, for example, I think, as I recall, in southern states, in the southern region of the country. In addition, there was only one program like that was available at an institution, an HBCU, at the time that I was at the Department of Ed. So, I think that there's a role for parents to work to advocate and to continue to try to pursue and to encourage universities to support and to grow these programs. So, and James, I just wanted to add that from a federal perspective, I am happy to share all sorts of documents that the government has put together on transition, on the IPSI programs. I remember those well from my Department of Education days, and if there's anything I can do to support and make sure that the audience has that going forward, I think those are useful resources. I will add one other point that within the federal government, there are so many different departments and agencies that are working on this issue and come at it from different perspectives. So there's lots of resources, but they're kind of sometimes maybe too widespread. So if there's a way that I can help kind of gather targeted information for the audience, I'd be happy to do that. So I'll turn it back.
Yeah, and on that point, there is a pretty active office of the White House Disability Services now that's connected to the administration. Very active. I get their emails, and they have panel discussions and conferences and a whole range of things with some real regularity. And they provide also that information. It's free to sign up for that newsletter, because they provide a lot of information about what the federal government is doing in its different departments, including, I think, stuff that would be of great interest to aspiring post-secondary students, people who want to go to college or tech. Let me ask one question about Source America. The kinds of, just briefly, the kinds of jobs that the folks, the 36,000 or so that you mentioned, are doing, and then also, we know from maybe our own personal experience in the work field that sometimes there are programs that, or rather, employers who provide like tuition support, that kind of thing. Is it any of that part of the scenario for these employees? Do some of them work for agencies or departments or federal agencies that provide tuition support?
Yeah, no, that's I mean, the Source America, well, the Ability One employees are working for a network of about 300 nonprofits. So that network kind of reports up to us, and we support them with technical assistance and other advice. So the federal agencies themselves would not be providing tuition assistance. So they're not technically their employees. I don't know about within our nonprofit network whether working for a particular provider there might be additional benefits.
Yeah,
I think that's possible. With regards to the kind of work that we do, historically, the work has tended toward, I think, kind of maybe like landscaping and ground maintenance, and also kind of food production service and food support. So, but what we're in a time of transition, especially post-COVID. with regards to certainly civilian military or civilian buildings, and staff just aren't back there as much. So there's certainly a transition on the food service side. We are actively working to get into different lines of business. So one of the areas that we've been focusing on are call centers and working and supporting federal agencies in that area. Also working on contracts and contract closeout. So trying to, when a contract ends, and the support that's needed to follow through and to work on that. So we're actively looking for new lines of business and places that we can work, that the employees can work to support the government. The largest contracts are within IT, so we're trying to see, how and where we can support them. A number of our employees do provide and work on products. So Ability One and Source America and that network, our employees make many of the military uniforms and make other materials that are associated with that. I have two daughters in the Army, and I pointed out that their uniform was made by one of our affiliates in Louisiana. So they were surprised to learn that. So, but
I guess part of why I'm asking this is because I was wondering, within all of those, within that pool of workers, if some percentage of them, for instance, have gone through college, I presume they have, and are working in fields, maybe in the IT world, as one example, where they're applying that. And so they've gone through kind of the experience of what we're sort of discussing today, transitioning through college, but then ended up employed by the federal government, by the nonprofits, as you mentioned, who contract with the federal government and bring university experience. I presume that's the case.
yeah, no, that's definitely the case. And I think one of our challenges is always trying to focus on identifying and recruiting and keeping a pipeline open of hiring individuals who are interested in our work, and that the work provides a goal and is of interest to them. So that's a challenge. We do work with VR agencies to get referrals. So so that you're absolutely right. That would definitely be the case.
Yeah, I want to circle back here now to, and Rene Lambert, our student. I have not forgotten about you. I'm going to bring you on in just a couple of moments, but one or two more quick questions for Dr. Robles and Bill. Dr. Robles, so kind of going to that question that I posed to Bill about the preparedness. I've taught at the university as well, and have on and off, and for any student, it's very hit and miss when the kids come in your door as to, are you ready for this college experience academically, sometimes just experientially. What are you finding in terms of students with disabilities who arrive on your campus? Are they being prepared? Is there enough support at the high school level to help them transition?
I think it depends on where they're coming from. I think it depends on, their economic background. I think there's a lot of factors, for the average student, whether they come prepared to college or not. I know we see that we have students with disabilities who come from, poor backgrounds. Maybe they're the first generation going to school. They may have some issues in terms of getting adjusted, but I never think that any issue is not something that we can overcome as professionals. Obviously a lot of that blame, which we put on the student, is really systemic barriers faced by people with disabilities. They are things that are ingrained and historical in the education system. We expect students with disabilities, neurodivergent students, and every other student to form or to conform into this mold that we have of what a university student should look like, should act like, should do at a certain stage in their college career. And I think we need to move away from that type of model where we try to force, a square into a round peg. And we need to like really look at our programs, examine, what we do as a university. And that includes, professors, it includes people who are accepting college applicants, where we just don't look at, the SAT grades or whatever, that we look at the whole person. And I know Rutgers does a pretty decent job at that, but I think we can all do better. Our students prepare. I think a lot of them are prepared. I think we have programs like the Education Opportunity Program, which other universities have, that students with disabilities can apply to, and other programs, within particular universities. And in New Jersey, if you come from a background where you have gone to a Black or brown school, basically, the organization that I'm a president of, the Latino Action Network, actually has sued the state of New Jersey in a case called Latino Action Network versus New Jersey, arguing that the constant and pervasive segregation of Black and brown students, which include a lot of students with disabilities, and we often forget that, has led to this constant year after year unpreparedness, if you want to use that word, of our students. So some of them don't even get into college, and some of the ones that do from these places, need more assistance, right? May need more tutoring. But like I said, just because they come at a level that may not be there yet doesn't mean that we as a university can't do a good job at making sure that we get them up to speed.
Okay.
And I did want to mention one more thing in terms of, since you asked, the statistics that universities collect is only the statistics of students that show up to the Office of Disability Services, right? So at our university, for example, there may be many more students with disabilities that we don't know about because they never sought the services, right? Other than that, we don't know how many students we have with disabilities, which is part of the problem. We don't know if they're struggling. We don't know if they even know about some of the services sometimes. Some students only find out about disability services maybe their second year, right? Because maybe they did okay in high school and now they're struggling because of their disability, but they don't know who to ask. So, these statistics that are put out by universities really aren't super like, hey, this is the number. That's not usually the number.
Okay, that's really helpful to know, and it makes a lot of sense, given that it's the whole process, the whole system is not as formalized as it would have been during the school period. I am going to go, after all, right now to Rene. Rene is going to be communicating with us through the chat, and I wanted to talk to you, Rene, about so far what you've heard in terms of the conversation, and you got on perfectly at the perfect time. I know you were in transit before you joined the panel, but you came on really to hear the bulk, if not all, of the presentation. So just would love to just see your feedback. What you've heard so far, is it mirroring what you have experienced thus far as a college student, and talk about where you're studying now, what you're studying. Good afternoon to you. And what are you studying in Manchester? and finishing up an associate's in general studies. Okay, psychology and journalism. That's ambitious. Thank you. One general question, and I know I don't want to bombard you with questions because I know obviously it's not the easiest thing on the planet for you to type for us. But thank you so much for the insight already. But one general question I have is, do you at your school, and have you had the support services that you need thus far to help you get through your education? You have. Yeah. That's good. That's good to hear it. It's at the community college level. So we're speaking right now on some level about what's happening at the university level. But I want to turn really quickly to Bill. In terms of the programs, you mentioned, I think that there are 325 or so programs like the one that you present, that you lead there at your university. It does occur to me, though, that there are thousands upon of schools and universities and higher ed institutions. So it's a fraction, right, in terms of those who have what you have. And speak to that perhaps, because I'm sure you travel around the country and speak to the need that exists out there.
Absolutely. It's estimated, James, that only 2% of students who have intellectual and other disabilities that could attend these programs actually do. So that's in part a capacity issue. So there's lots more room for building these programs out. Again, I would to reference Think College as a resource for those universities, colleges, tech schools who want to get a program like this started, because Think College can provide some technical assistance to make that happen if they're interested in making that happen. Of those 300 plus programs that are out there, the majority of them don't offer the full experience that is inclusive of living on campus, right? So there's huge capacity there as well, because that's a great modality in which students can learn independent living skills, just navigating the campus, finding their meals, just developing those skills that are necessary for full community inclusion. So yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Some states are doing a marvelous job of putting some infrastructure and finances in place to make these kinds of programs come to fruition in those states. Other states have a long way to go in that, right? So some states have appropriations in their state budget to help programs like this get off the ground, but that's not true in every state, right? Think College does offer some grant funding to help to get programs off the ground as well. But again, that's pretty limited. They have a pretty small cohort every year that they can work with to help in the development of programs like UIREACH or those IPSI programs, as I previously mentioned. So to your question, yes, there is a capacity issue. This needs to be grown. I heard one parent say to me, and I thought it was excellent, that any school that accepts state funding should be required to have a program like this, right? That it should be a part of what the state governments are doing to make sure that persons who have learning and intellectual and developmental disabilities and other disabilities have access to programs like this. Our program boasts some pretty great stats. Like 93% of our graduates go on to employment. That's significant, right? That's far more significant than persons with the same disabilities who don't attend programs like this. And 60+% of them live independently in the communities of their choice because of that experience in the residence halls. So again, the programs that are out there like this can promote the same kinds of outcomes that the voc rehabs of the world, that the Medicaid waiver offices of the world, those same kinds of outcomes, if there's the infrastructure to support them and sustain them moving forward.
One other quick question, assistive technology, which is a term that I had to learn when I came into this field just a few years ago and just working in this capacity with regards to people with disabilities, must be changing at an incredibly rapid rate as all technology is now. A couple of years ago, we weren't talking about AI. And now AI is, part of the fabric of our lives on some level. How does a university like yours keep up with the kind of assistive technology that students need? How do you sort of keep a pace with that?
It's a great question. I think what we have learned as a society is that anything we do in terms of assistive technology not only benefits people with disabilities, it benefits all of us, right? So everybody has one of these things now, right? Nobody is without them. And so we tap into that with our student population and the natural inclination of students of this generation to use technology in their everyday lives, right? So we factor that in, and it's no longer stigmatizing as it once was. Assistive technology has come a long way in that, you used to carry this big board or whatever that was, that determined how you use it. But everybody has access to some form or another of assistive technology on their phone. We also offer a class specifically aimed at technology use to help in tasks of everyday living and tasks related to your college, right? So that's one of our computers and technology classes that we teach. And we're now teaching that to not only our students, but to any student who wants to take that class, because we just know technology is a great tool and that everybody can utilize it. That's one of the other pieces that we're learning about universal design for learning and teaching people with disabilities. When we implement those kinds of strategies, it benefits all students, not just our students. Dr. Robles talked about finding different ways that students can express what they have learned, or different ways that they can learn in the first place. What some of our instructors that we're working with are learning is that is a great thing across the board, not just for persons with disabilities. So, as one piece of technology or one instructional strategy advances, there's widespread benefit across multiple populations.
Yeah. I mean, I think of just in my day-to-day life, with the exception of some on again and off again mental illness issues that I deal with, trying to keep up with the technology for just our day-to-day occupations, if you're able-bodied or not, is challenging. So I wondered how what is coming down the line. I've seen some extraordinary new work being done by people like Google and Apple and so forth with regards to assistive technology, not just through phones, but computers, but it's coming at such a fast pace. So I know that university resources can be limited. So that's why I posed that question. Javier, Dr. Robles, if we could go back for a moment to the challenges for students of color, since this is a conference on Latinos with disabilities, you've obviously yourself have lived that experience. So I wondered if you could speak to maybe some of the changes that have come from the time when you decided I'm going to go to college and got yourself into college and live that experience versus what's happening now. If you could provide some sort of insight into the comparison.
Well, I'm sold. So, I mean, when I first applied for college, we didn't have the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? We didn't have a number of laws when I went to Rutgers, actually, as an undergrad. So we really had to fight as students for a lot of things, for ramps, for power doors, for things that the university didn't have at the time. And I think Loyd mentioned, some of the great things that technology actually has brought us, from the phone to computers to all these things that we are seeing in terms of robotics and development that are helping people with disabilities. Of course, one of the things that no one ever mentions is the fact that before we had texting, people who were deaf and hard of hearing are using TTY machines, which are the first text, if you want to look at it that way. And that before we had, phones that you could speak to, we had, drag and dictate, which was used by people with mobility impairments. So a lot of the technology you see today actually was used initially for people with disabilities. Just a lot of the technology you see for people with disabilities often was used after a war for soldiers. So, people with disabilities to some extent are innovators and are the first people to use these technologies. What has changed? I think universities are more accommodating now. Universities understand that, understand that people with disabilities are just like every other student. They may have different needs, and if those needs are accommodated, they're going to do just as well as other students, right? If we fight an accommodation, if a student says, hey, I need this accommodation in class, and the professor says, well, I don't think you do, that not only forms this ableist mentality about what the student actually needs, but it makes it difficult for both parties to move on. And I think it's important for professors, for academia, to understand that people with disabilities aren't asking for a handout. They're just asking to be treated like everybody else. And I think when I first started school, there was a lot of challenges. We had to fight as students for a lot of what we got. And now we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. We have 504. And, let's remember that we only have these things because people with disabilities and their allies and their families fought for them, not because government just said, hey, we want to give you an ADA or we want to give you a 504, right? And I think it's important for, young people in particular who are going to school to realize that they have these rights now that they should take advantage of, right? Don't be shy to say to someone, that's my right as an individual. That's my right as a person with a disability. Because I think sometimes, especially culturally speaking, right? I come from a Latino background. My parents are Puerto Rican, but we tend sometimes not to question authority. We tend to think that if you're a professor or a doctor or whatever, that you probably, have this, this cloak of invincibility and that you know more than I do. When in reality, sometimes we don't, right? We don't know everything. We don't know, what our students need often unless they tell us. So you need to be your own best advocate. And I think for students, they need to get that message early and often. They needed to get it from their parents. And we need to do a better job at talking to parents, right? We don't reach out to parents early on and say to the parent, hey, it's important for you to make sure that you create a good advocate of your child because one day you're going to be gone and they're going to be left without you, right? And, if we don't tell parents that, they don't get it right away. And once you create a good advocate, good luck, because they're going to go out there and they're going to make a difference. And I think that's important because they're not going to just make a difference for themselves. They're going to make a difference for every other person, with a disability that follows them.
All incredibly important. One of the things that stands out right away is we had an earlier panel discussion in the conference addressing refugees and asylum seekers with disabilities. And a consistent part of the conversation was about the fact that there are many rights that exist, even for asylees, even for non-citizens, that they're just not made aware of or know about when they arrive. And so a huge challenge is letting them know that these laws are here to protect you as well, even if you are not a US citizen, for instance. Bill, on your campus, do you find that the students know their rights, that those going through your programs, in addition to knowing about services, also know their rights?
Yeah, that's a huge part of our orientation, James, to share the rights and the responsibilities, right? Because it's one thing to have the rights, but you also have a responsibility to uphold here. So we focus heavily with our students on knowing what those rights are and what the responsibilities are that go along with that. Our students don't get a pass on the code of student behavior because they are part of the REACH program, right? Yeah. So they have to be a part of the community like everybody else does. So sometimes that takes us practicing those skills repeatedly with some of the students so that they understand it, because sometimes the language can be, lofty. So putting it at a place where they can understand it and integrate that into, okay, this is how that is reflected in my behavior, is a big part of what we do, right? So helping the students understand what those rights are. I'm proud to say that the University of Iowa has invested a lot in student retention. But again, we could do a lot better in helping our students and families know about what those retention efforts are and how to access them. So that's a part of the freshman orientation here at Iowa, about all of those things, that from study labs to, advocates who are on campus to, a bionic bus, whatever. Let's figure out ways to help people realize what those supports are and how to access them when they need them. Our program has a staffing ratio of such that we're able to do that fairly well. But we're still finding that beyond even that freshman year, it needs to be put out there every single year so that the students know how to access. And we have a mechanism here called first year seminars where that's done well. But again, I see the need for reintroducing that information almost every year, definitely every year that a student is in college, so that it comes to mind that there are resources available to me and here's how I access them.
Yeah, and again, this is not something that's confined specifically to students of color or students with disabilities, but just the average American often doesn't know their rights. And so, we're coming up on an election, and you're hearing a messaging out there that basically says, have a plan to vote, and know what your rights are when you show up to vote, because you do have rights and there are expectations. I want to go back to Dave for a moment, and then I'm going to go to some questions and answers that I've been posing with Rene. But Dave, of what you're hearing so far, again, from your experience having been on not really the other side, but on the federal side, and supporting some of these programs, what stands out for you in terms of the conversation we're having?
Well, yeah, thanks. Thank you, James. I'm really struck by the comments of both Javier and Bill, and it's, to me, there's two parts of the equation. There's understanding and knowing what's available to you, but then as part of the transition to higher ed, there's that taking that big step of being your own self-advocate, and you've identified where disability services, or you know that you need to talk to a professor, but you need to also be able to speak up and to follow through. And I mean, I don't know exactly how you teach that, if that's part of Bill, that's part of the introductory class and the training that you have. I can tell you that I have my own son who's a junior, and in attending a university, and when I went with him, and he has a disability, and I said, here, I went and introduced myself to the disability service folks and found out where the office was and did all these things, but it took him months to go over there, and I don't know if it was that he was afraid or just not comfortable self-advocating, but to me, that's a real challenge, and perhaps an area of additional focus to that the students understand. There's been a transition. I think it was Javier who said, and I really liked the way that he phrased it, from the entitlement to the eligibility. But to be eligible, you need to stand up and speak. So, and I think that's a real issue, and will remain so.
Yeah, and some of those in that category of eligibility, then there are still some entitlements, right, in terms of the rights that protect you and the rights that allow you to assert yourself on campus. I'm going to go here to a couple of questions that I've posed to Rene a bit offline here, and I'll read the question and then her answer as well. I asked her if she could talk about her network of support, her family, other students, and how that has helped, if that's helped lead to her success. And perhaps what else she needs in terms of supports. She says she has had support. She lives with her mom and sister, and has aides who accompany her to school. I'm sure that's a tremendous help. The disability office at the school ensures that she has note takers and tutors if she needs them, and she does get extra time for homework. One thing that could be better and more helpful would be better transportation to and from the campus. And that's that's always an issue for everyone, but I can see right away how that would impact you. And so that's an area where that could be improved. And then also beyond that, I asked if she has ever had to kind of assert her rights, or rather if she knew her rights before and when she arrived on campus, those rights that we're alluding to now. She said that her high school guidance counselor told her about some of them when she was graduating in 2019. But I'm also new to the States. Oh, she's from Jamaica. I believe you're a naturalized citizen, as I understand it. And so still has a lot to learn. She came to the United States in 2017. And we haven't even gotten to that, the idea of immigrant students, students who may be out of status. There are many, we've seen a lot of reports in recent years about undocumented dreamers, for instance, attending college, earning degrees, some of them becoming lawyers, etc. So that's another level of sort of barriers that may arise. Javier, if we could come back to you for just a moment, what about that question of immigrant students? Oh, and you're a citizen now, a naturalized citizen. I see that. What about immigrant students? I'm sure you interact with them as someone who's
Sure.
Latino issues.
I mean, immigrant students to some extent, in my mind, are like students with disabilities, right? We, as a nation, often refuse to see the potential in these groups. We refuse, even in times when, we're desperate for employees, to see, what great workers they are. And we've seen through DACA, as an example, that all these students that we wanted to get rid of because they were a drain on our system now have graduated college, now are attorneys, now are working with the community, now are, paying taxes, which is what we want in, with people with disabilities. And, if you are a person with a disability, I think you said it before, James, depending on which state you are in, you have different rights, you have different laws. In New Jersey, if you're here undocumented, you can have a driver's license, which means that you can get to your jobs, to your school. It varies state to state in terms of what students can get or do. It varies in terms of what a state may do in terms of non-federal tuition, right? Because you can't use federal money for these because it's a state money you can use. State laws that would make a difference in a lot of these situations. Obviously, they can't get Pell Grants if they go to the university. So often we have students who are working 3 jobs so that they can go to school because they can't have financial aid. So, we have these systems which are very complex and often confusing, not just to the student, but to the families and even to the people who work there. Like, some people who work at universities are like, well, you're undocumented, you can't go to a university, right? That's not true. You can pay for it, you can go there. You may not get financial aid, you may not get all these other things, but it is confusing. If you're a student with a disability, obviously there's a lot of programs that you're not going to be able to qualify for, and those may be state programs like personal care assistance, or there may be programs specific to a region, and it's going to make it more difficult for you to go to a university where other students would just live there or be able to get there. And I know Rene mentioned transportation, which is probably one of the top issues as to why people don't even go to college, right? If you can't get there and you can't afford to live there because of your economic situation or your disability, then you're probably going to say, well, it's probably not worth it for me to go to college, even if you're, a great student, even if you have the ability. The logistics of a lot of these things are super difficult. And, people with disabilities are creative, very creative at getting around some of these logistics. but sometimes it's really difficult. I know of people who were super smart and just opted not to go to school because it would have been like 80-hour a week job for them just to attend, a community college.
Mm.
So.
Yeah, and sometimes there's enough of a deterrent in any instance. Yeah, exactly. I want to in a moment here go to some closing thoughts from each of you, but mention that in the opening presentation of the conference, I spoke to kind of an overview of the state of Latinos with disabilities, and for anyone in our audience who wants to receive that, just let us know. And we can email that to you, or I'll email it anyway, actually, through anyone who's registered through Eventbrite. But one of the points that I raised in there is the idea of a kind of quadruple challenge that exists for the community that we're addressing in this particular conference even. And that challenge can be multi-layered. And so, one, you may have the challenge of living with a disability in, basically an able-bodied world. Beyond that, you may have income challenges. Next, there may be institutionalized racism that you're confronting, those kinds of barriers that have that confronted all children of color, most children of color, young people of color. And then immigration status can be yet another factor, which we sort of spoke about. So these are not easy things very often. And students like Rene who overcome all of these, and in some way or another, she's dealt with at least a couple of these, is something to be admired and applauded, of course. I'd like now to go to just some closing comments. We've got about 5 or 7 minutes here left. So if some closing thoughts from you, Dave, in terms of what you've heard today.
I was struck by one of the comments in the chat, and I think that's absolutely been a theme of the discussion here, and I just wanted to underscore it. And that is learning about the resources that are available depending on your disability. And I thought it was really instructive that Javier touched on all of the touched on transportation, because there's so many wraparound issues beyond the challenge of just getting into and attending school. There's all of these housing and transportation and all of those issues. But learning about resources, learning about what's available within your state, at your school, the school that you're interested in, that's absolutely crucial. The earlier, the better. I think that's one of the big themes and one of the big takeaways today. As part of that, I just wanted to offer, the federal government does have a lot of resources in these areas. A lot of it is written down, but I'm happy to provide to any of the attendees follow-up information on any of the areas where they might want some more information from the federal lens, of course. And it's not a substitute for what schools or states are doing, but perhaps it's a good start in an overview. So just wanted to offer that. Thanks. It looks like James may have.
Oh, here I am. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I started talking without thinking. I apologize. I just want to, before we continue and go to Bill for some closing thoughts, I want to mention, so I don't forget, Doris Maldonado, as you've seen in the chat, has been provided some terrific background information and links, and she's a wealth of knowledge and has been very helpful in terms of putting together these panels. She will be our keynote speaker after our short break from this one. So Bill, some closing thoughts from you about everything you've heard today and maybe the biggest takeaways for our audience.
Yeah, I think we've heard the myriad of issues, and we've seen that they seemingly are never ending. But I would just like to highlight the power of advocacy, right? The power of our voices, our collective voices, to impact change. In addition to what I do on the day-to-day, I take that role as helping our students amplify their own voices and then putting them in places where those voices can be heard. So, we take trips to Des Moines, we take trips to DC so that folk can share their personal stories so that folk who are making the laws and building the structures understand what the true needs are, not from the focus of the provider, but from the focus of the individual. So Rene, we need more examples like you out there who are just showing that it is possible and giving hope to persons with disabilities. And like you, Javier, to just show that this is not a pipe dream anymore. It is really possible to achieve a quality college experience and post-college have your life enhanced by that. So I love the fact that this is one platform for that, but I think we got a much larger stage to get the message out to continue to say, hey, as a society, we've come a long way, but we got a long way to go, and let's keep at it until we have created those equitable systems that help people with or without disabilities achieve.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for the work that your university is doing. It sounds like it's something of a template that other universities could follow. So thanks so much for that. Dr. Robles, some closing thoughts, and then I'll go to Rene at the end.
Sure. Thank you, James. And thank you, William. I think I spoke to Carol Salas Pagan. I think she might have mentioned your program to me this morning, but she's in Puerto Rico. I'm amazed by all the speakers and Rene. I agree that we have accomplished so much. I would caution us to, remember that this is an election year and that, a lot of programs for people with disabilities have been under attack in terms of funding. We saw during COVID that as much as we've advanced as a nation, that there are still opportunities for us to be discriminated against. We have seen through Supreme Court rulings that when it comes to education, people of color, Black and brown people can be taken back. There was just a recent report that said that after the ruling, a lot of universities that were really diverse now all of a sudden are less diverse or are taking less people of color. So, we have to keep that in mind. And I agree with everybody that we do have to continue to create advocates and continue to tell people that, you're not asking for handouts. These are your rights as a student, as an academic, as a citizen of this great country. And these rights are your rights. And I agree. We just have to have more students like Rene, more advocates, more, people who just keep moving forward. And I would agree. I think William said in terms of resources, just know your resources, like look for them. We have Google. That's something I never had, right? We can just type in something and find all this information. I had to go to the library and open a book and get a card, and it was horrible. Rene, you don't want to know anything about that.
It's the double-edged sword, right? Google.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Did you have any other final thoughts?
No, that's it. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you. And thank you for raising the point about the affirmative action rulings by the Supreme Court, because as you noted, distinct drops at many of the major universities in terms of incoming class, and it's a direct fallout from that ruling. And in many ways, this reminds me of a previous conversation that we had about voting and people with disabilities in this election year, and a whole slew across the country, primarily at the state level, of more restrictive election laws that not only impact the sort of overtly targeted, if you will, but have a spin-off effect and can make it more difficult for people with disabilities in general, just to get to the ballot and file a vote. So these laws that may on their surface not seem like they're aimed at people with disabilities have a ripple effect, can very often affect them. A couple of closing thoughts from Rene here. I asked what's basically behind her personal drive. She said, I just think society needs to make it easier for everyone to achieve their academic goals, regardless of disabilities or abilities. On a on the personal level, she says, I've always enjoyed learning since I was a child. So why should I stop now? I agree with that completely. I haven't stopped, Rene, and I'm an old man. Everyone deserves to contribute to the forward movement of our society, and everyone has a purpose. Absolutely, amen. And then I asked her in closing what her dream job is. She hopes to become a psychologist and a theologian one day, and journalism will help her with her writing and communication skills. As a longtime journalist myself, I agree with that wholeheartedly as well. Rene, thank you so much for your incredibly valuable input and insight and your own lived experience. And I want to thank all of our panelists. Really enjoyed the conversation. I learned a lot, and I think our audience will take so much away from this as well. So that'll conclude this panel discussion. We'll be back in about 10 minutes with our final speaker of the day, our keynote speaker, Doris Maldonado. And I want to thank everyone so far who's been with us today. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Thank you so much.